Hello and welcome to Shoot the Breeze, where we take a nostalgic look at a random football magazine from the past. I'm Andy Smith, aka Scott's Footy Cards on Twitter, and with me is Tom Brogan.
Hello.
In each episode, we'll invite a special guest to join us in trawling through the magazine and discuss anything contained within it. This could be anything from an article to a photograph to a competition to an advert. Basically, if it's in it, then we'll talk about it. So sit back and let's shoot the breeze.
Wriggles clear, might just get the chip, and he does, he's scored! Oh, what a great goal! He's done it! Oh, brilliant goal! Wiggling his way, that's an excellent ball, and Didi! It's a goal, four for Clydebank. Excellent play by Hughes. I think the player of the match, and sweetly finished by Penny.
This week our guest is Dave Hannigan. Dave writes for the Irish Times, among other publications from his base in Long Island. He's also the author of numerous books, including Boy Wonder, De Valera in America, and two on Muhammad Ali, Drama in the Bahamas, and The Big Fight. Thanks for coming on, Dave.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you and welcome.
So this week we're looking at a copy of Shoot from the 3rd of October 1981. And on the front cover, we've got Ipswich v Sunderland. It's Franz Tyson and Ian Munro jostling for the ball. Wolves and Dundee team groups. World Cup action. The qualifiers for Spain 82 are midway through. Star Sport, Steve Perryman. Clough's threat to Burns. The players' verdicts on Frank Stapleton. Super Soccer clocks to be won. Free inside team tabs for the 3rd and 4th divisions. And we'll always look at the cover price, 25 pence. Australia, 55 cents. Italy, 1,500 lira, and in Ireland 36p. Lots of colour on the cover there, and I think two good strips there in Ipswich and Sunderland, and the tango ball. So first thing I asked, Dave, were you a regular purchaser of Shoot in the day?
I absolutely was. Shoot was like the holy book for me, you know, between the ages of like maybe 8 to 13, 4. I would have been 10 for this edition. Like, so this was right smack bang in the middle of my addiction, you know, every Thursday I would go to do the grocery shop with my mother. And for helping her then I would go, there was a little news agent called the Read and Write. And I would go to Read and Write and get that week's Shoot. And every so often, like they wouldn't have, for whatever, there would be a delay and they wouldn't have the new one. And the shop assistant would try to fob me off with last week's, which was like incredibly insulting and you know, demeaning. How dare she? You know, I'm waiting for this with bated breath every Thursday. And it would be gone, like I would be gone through it. Maybe apart from the crossword, I'd be gone through it by Friday morning, you know. It was an appointment for me every week with Shoot. Absolutely. It was because, you know, it's hard for kids today to understand, and even people slightly younger than me, I'm 50, to understand that this was our window into the football world. Like there was no internet. This was our internet. This was our glimpse and where we got information. And if you were an anorak, which I think most of us who read Shoot were kind of anorak-y, you know, if you were an anorak, Shoot was where you picked up all these snippets of information that you would then bring into school with you and you know, boast about or you know, pretend to be incredibly knowledgeable, you know, with all that kind of stuff.
So on this particular copy at the very top, you may well be familiar with what's going on there. Would you have had an address or a name written onto yours just to, you know, keep it aside? This one says 52F, I think it says.
52F. No, I wasn't that bad. I mean, I had them all in a box that was, you know, there was nobody in my house. My older brother was too old for it, so there was nobody in my house going to steal them. And they never left the house. And in fact, when we cleaned out the family home a few years ago, most of them had to be thrown out because they were moth-eaten and degraded. But I did manage to save a few which I now, you know, contain, you know, try to look after them and make them pristine. But no, I never wrote on them. In fact, the only thing what I would do from time to time is if there was pictures of my favorite players. And I was a big Aston Villa fan at this point because it was 1981. Aston Villa were in their pomp. They were winning the league and then about to win the European Cup. I would cut out pictures of Gary Shaw, who features in this edition that we're discussing, and was a Shoot columnist. Pictures of Gary Shaw, people like that, and you know, if there was a Maradona picture, because he was coming on stream around that time as well. Anything like that, I would cut out and put on my wall. So I was defacing them, I suppose, a little bit by clipping out the pictures.
See, I've collected them for a number of years, and you're the sort of person that I have to thank, because I've been able to collect ones in pristine condition. Whereas, you know, it's me and my three brothers and a sister, and there's no way those magazines were going to stay in this sort of state. You know, you would have things cut out. We used to use the team photos to make cards, so we would cut out the faces and stick them onto a card from a cereal packet and play on a Subbuteo pitch with them. So we used to get our money's worth out of it.
The one thing I remember my brother doing to annoy me is drawing facial hair on some of the players. You know, I'd open it and because I'd have read it once and I'd open it again and I'd be rereading it. And then I suddenly noticed, like, you know, Gary Shaw would have a black pirate's beard on his face. Stuff like that. You know, there would be some hooliganism and vandalism. And the funny thing, of course, about living in America now is I obviously have a reputation as an anorak, because a neighbor came up to me a couple of years ago and just gave me 6 boxes of Sports Illustrated magazine, which is, you know, more grown up, I suppose, than Shoot, but Sports Illustrated magazine going back to the 70s and 80s, and they're just in my basement. And I you know, I have no room in my basement. There are other people's collections, and I'm like, no, I think I just can't, with good conscience. They have to stay there, you know.
Yeah.
From time to time, I'll open a box and read about 1970s baseball, about which I know absolutely nothing. But, you know, I appreciate that they're historical artifacts, if you want to describe it like that.
Yeah.
They're manuscripts from another time, like Shoe magazine.
Yeah.
So will we open up and get into the magazine then? So
Yep.
First couple of pages, we've got the players' verdicts on Frank Stapleton. Stapleton's deadly. So Frank Stapleton's not long transferred here from Arsenal to Manchester United. Did you have a relationship with Frank Stapleton when you were younger?
Well, I did, in terms of, like, he was one of our Irish heroes, you know. He was one of our Irish heroes at that time. He was part of an Ireland, really. I mean, he was there for the start of the Charlton era when we did well, but he was really part of that kind of hard luck late 70s, early 80s, when we had great teams, but would never, you know, we'd always find a way not to qualify. We were undone a couple of times by very dodgy refereeing decisions. You know, but Stapleton, I mean, you know, he was leading the line for that Irish team with Michael Robinson, who later went to Spain, and people like that. And what struck me, or what strikes me when I'm looking at this edition, and when you look at any edition of Shoot, is like that they were able to get players to speak about other players, which I don't think today is nearly impossible. You know, Martin Buck and Alan Sunderland were players, like, just looking at that page, these were players playing for, you know, the biggest clubs, and yet they're willing to speak to this children's magazine with quite good quotes about a fellow professional, you know, which is, you wouldn't find that. I don't think you'd find that today, or, you know, that would certainly be a lot more difficult for any journalist to pull off. And Frank, the funny thing is, you say, I later, Frank Stapleton later ended up over here managing in Major League Soccer. In the very first season of Major League Soccer, actually, with the New England Revolution. And it was always going to be a bad fit, because in America, they need their managers, like, to have some sort of personality or charisma. And Frank, that wasn't his forte. You know, I knew even before a ball was kicked, he wasn't going to last long in New England, because he wasn't cut out for that. You know, you got to be media savvy, and you got to play the media game here. And he was never going to do that. But he was a great centre forward. And I remember, didn't he go back and play centre half in an FA Cup final for Man United as well, when Kevin Moore was sent off?
Was that 1985? Is that the Everton game?
Yeah, definitely one of those 80s cup finals, because United would never win a league, but they'd be good for a cup. And you know, Stapleton, no, he was a very, very good player. And you know, when I was reading through this, here, there are just 2 words that struck me here that I completely forgotten about and blanked out: the transfer tribunal. Right? What happened to that? I guess the Bosman kind of ruling got rid of that somewhere in the mid-90s, right? You remember that was a big thing, the transfer tribunal, when fees were being negotiated, and I presume it's just gone. I've never heard of it for years. Like,
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't remember who the last player was who had their fee decided by the transfer tribunal. Yeah,
that'd be a great Anorak quiz question.
So yes, it says there that Arsenal were looking for £2 million, but the tribunal awarded them only 1.1 million.
That seems like a fairly steep drop there from 2 to 1.1, right?
It's such a recipe for bad feeling and bad blood, isn't it?
And the thing about the weird thing about transfer fees is when I first moved here, and I would be explaining to people about how professional football in Britain and Ireland worked. They couldn't believe that there was a money price put on an individual, because over here they trade, as they call it. They trade players, and they trade, I'll give you my best player if you give me your 4 best young players. They can't, as the fellow said to me, it's like they're like pieces of meat, the way they put prices on them. So it was a very odd kind of outsider's view of the whole transfer fee mechanism. And I presume at that time, Trevor Francis was the record holder still then, was he? Or would it have been Steve Daly? Like for the $1 million, because the $1 million or the £1 million player was still a big thing back then, right?
Yeah, I think Brian Robson get transferred just round about this time.
Oh yeah.
So for 1.5, I think he went with Remy Moses. I seem to remember the two of them going together for a sort of combined fee. But yeah, you're right. It was round about that sort of 1 million to 1.5 million mark at that time,
which was an enormous sum. Like, I mean, that was £1 million player was. That was the kind of elite company, wasn't it, at that point?
All right, so Frank Stapleton, he scored that season. He scored 13 goals in 41 league games for Manchester United, and then 14 and 41 the following season, and then 13 and 42 in 83, 84. And it sort of goes down a bit into single figures. He gets 71 caps and 20 goals for Ireland.
That's good going for Ireland. And he ended up at Ajax, right? He played in Ajax for a while.
Yeah, he had a few games for Ajax, yeah.
Yeah, he had an interesting career. He also, he brought out a book, terrible autobiography called Frankly Speaking. Frankly Speaking was a terrible book, and it was just an all-up shoddy production, and it included captions like a picture of Frank Stapleton running on a field and a caption, "Me running." But he was a good player. I mean, the numbers there are perhaps not those early numbers at United aren't stellar, but he was a good centre forward in that era, in that time.
So also in page 3 here, we've got a bit called Get Back to Basics. So England have just lost in a World Cup qualifier to Norway, and this wee piece is about effort versus reward for playing for your country. And so this is, of course, the famous England defeat to Norway. Your boys took one hell of a beating. It's Norwegian television commentator Bjorn Minge, if you remember that.
Yeah, that one was later though, right? You boys took a hell of a beating.
Oh, that was this
one.
Game.
Oh, I thought that was later. Again, when I was reading this, like it made me sad because England are so good now. It's like, I look at the England squad and I'm like, God, they really have a really good team and a great first 11 and a really deep squad. And they're talking about Jack Grealish might not even be in their team, and I'm like, Jesus, they must be really handy. And I remember, England back then, they didn't make the 84 Euros, right? They didn't make those. I preferred obviously when England were like this, and they would always have these big inquests, like these big, what's wrong with our game, and the game is the game is gone, and kind of that whole kind of, there was always an apocalyptic feel to England failing. And of course, the other thing is the Scots were very good at that point, right?
Yeah.
You were on a run of qualifying for, the World Cup all the time. Like that was the kind of a thing that Scotland did. 78, 82 kind of thing.
Yeah, 74, 78, 82, 86.
Yeah, geez, I forgot about 74.
Yeah, the US 94 was the first one in ages that we didn't get. But you're right about England now. England are, certainly for myself, it's now a possibility that they could actually win something. And that possibility alone is quite frightening.
The only thing that I'm clinging to is I do not believe that they have the right man managing England. I don't think Gareth Southgate is the best man to get the best out of these players. I always think that Southgate to me always looks like sort of like the assistant to the regional manager. I don't think he's maybe I'm wrong, but maybe the English squad is so good that it doesn't matter that they'll just win in spite of him. But he's my last hope for England. Well, that and the fact that they're a bit dodgy at the back. But I mean, they have genuine flair players. Like, Grealish, obviously, because he could have played for Ireland. But he reminds me of Gascoigne in 1990, like the way that he plays and the way he goes past people. He just has that something, and you're like, geez, if he's in the Gascoigne role, and they could go better than 1990 if they get a run at it. So yes, it is a grim and frightening prospect for us all.
Well, I've lived in England for 21, 22 years now, so that could be my excuse to move back up north. If that happens.
So we turn over the page here, and we're into news desk. So news desk. So a couple of wee things to pick out here. So Dave, Andy and I are both Clydebank supporters, and there's a wee piece here about Clydebank, where it says supporters of Clydebank won't have much to pay for their football this season. Cabowie Park's just become an all-seater ground, and the prices are now, for the rest of the season, £1 for adults and 50p for children. Shoots says surely the cheapest admission prices in Britain.
And also, female fans get in for nothing as well. That's quite important.
Really? Gee, that's very progressive for 1981. Like the female, trying to get women into the grounds. I know, obviously, today, and for the last 25, 30 years, there's a lot more women at games, but that really seemed progressive for them, right?
Yeah, there's. I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Tom, but there was, as I said, there was my three brothers and my sister, and we went to a midweek game at Clydebank, round about this time it would have been, and my oldest brother didn't want to pay the 50p, so he got my sister's cagoule, put it on, put the hood up, zipped it all the way up, and then went into the girls' gate. But he got stopped, and the guy says, "Excuse me, this is for girls only, or this is for lassies." And he turns around and goes, "I'm a lassie," and he walked in. And I just saw the guy who said that he probably still has nightmares about that. That poor lassie looking like that. But yeah, even back then, 50p for us was still a bit steep.
As Clydebank fans, guys, I wonder, like, when I see Clydebank, I immediately think of the plan, the ill-fated plan to transplant them to Dublin. When such things were in fashion, Wimbledon were moving to Dublin, Clydebank were moving to Dublin. That was a really strange kind of, strange time in football when people thought you could just, up a club and move it to another country.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean that's a very divisive moment here for Clydebank. Clydebank fans still get angry about that. If you mention it, yeah.
Oh, I'd imagine you would. I mean, it was just, I used to, when I lived in Ireland, I covered the Premier League, and I remember being at a Wimbledon match when they were protesting. The Wimbledon fans at Sellers Park were protesting their proposed move to Dublin. And that's how real it was, like with Sam Haman, and Sam Haman had to go over and address the fans who wouldn't leave the ground at the end of a game on a Saturday afternoon because, I think that the Wimbledon to Dublin one had more momentum behind it and more big money behind it than the Clydebank one, which I always thought was the Clydebank one was a bit of a flyer, like.
Yeah, I know it was a bit of a pie in the sky idea kind of thing, but yeah, it would get sorted out in the newspapers here, the Daily Writer and the Sunday Mail, etc. And a couple of the players sort of got behind it, and they've just absolutely persona non grata. One of the players who really should be a sort of Clydebank legend, the fans just don't have any time for him because he backed it. At the time, perhaps a bit naively. I don't think there was any malice behind it, but.
Yeah, it's a strange, or that those were strange enterprises.
Yeah. So let's have a look at some of the other wee things on these pages here. Franny's Fine Filly, Franny Lee's Filly, I don't know how to pronounce that, Marquesa Hoffen, won £4,832 prize money in York recently, and Lee also picked up an extra £292 in a side bet. I think that's kind of, again, it's a kind of, like we were saying earlier on, a sign of the times. I don't think you'd ever get articles talking about players pocketing trivial sums of money, or even any kind of cash figures like that in the articles.
That would be, and you wonder, like, I mean, I know there were people who worked for Shoot who went on to become, broadsheet sports writers and stuff, like Chris Davies, his name pops up in this one, who later wrote for the Telegraph. But that's great information. That's like good reportage. Like, how the hell? I presume Franny Lee just told them, like, they were just so open about these things. And didn't Franny Lee then go on to buy Man City, or wasn't he?
Yeah.
Later, like, was that early 90s maybe? Because he did make a lot of money. So, he says he has built up a thriving paper company in Lancashire.
Yeah.
And again, like, what I love about this is you never imagine, like, you'll ever read about David Silva, who has built up a thriving paper company in Lancashire. Vincent Company, who now runs a pub in just outside Manchester. Would never. It's an old. Yeah, I mean, the game that we're discussing here, like, is, as I say, is about as relevant to today as Charles Dickens' London was to us growing up. It's like we were like, really, this is how it was back in the day.
Yeah.
So a couple other wee things there. There's a bit there that says Mullery's video show, and it's about Charlton boss Alan Mullery's video recording every home game so the players can see what they did wrong or right during matches. Mullery said, when you tell the players they haven't done too well, half believe you and half don't. This way they can see for themselves. And again, they've got Middlesbrough boss Bobby Murdoch also taught his players a lesson by running a video recording of the team's 3-1 defeat by Spurs on the coach. I hope it embarrasses him, says Murdoch. Again, sort of interesting at that time as well, filming games and using it as a sort of training exercise for players.
I'd imagine they were ahead of their time there. Like, that's really groundbreaking kind of stuff, isn't it? The video. Think of, like, how much video analysis. I mean, that's somebody's job now, or that's probably a whole office full of people at a major club now. Video analysis of their games and the opponents that they're about to play. But these guys, Alan Mullery and Bobby Murdoch, were obviously ahead of the game, and you can see Bobby Murdoch. They got a 1-1 draw at Liverpool. That was a very good result back then against that Liverpool team. And there's another story there just across from that with Peter Knowles, the Wolves star who quit football 12 years ago to become a Jehovah's Witness. Now, I was 10 reading this when I would have been reading this edition of Shoot. I have no memory of Peter Knowles apart from I learned of him through Billy Bragg's song God's Footballer, which is a beautiful, beautiful song. And that's the first thing I saw the first thing I thought of when that came to mind, because I never knew the story. Obviously, if you retired in the 70s, it was before my time, but it always struck me as a fascinating story.
Yeah, and Wolves retained his registration, so he was a Wolves player until 1982, although he played his last game in September '69 for Wolves.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
But a succession of managers kind of hoped he was going to come back.
Yeah. I don't understand what he's saying here. I understand what he's saying, but I don't know why. But he's saying about Kenny Hibbett. It was a testimonial, and he said he offered to play in the game because he told me I was the only Wolves player who had not approached him with a request to play. So basically he says, I'll play because he hasn't asked me, whereas everybody else has asked me, so I'm not going to play. I don't know how that works.
I wonder, was it like that, given what you just said about his registration, like that he had, that it was an annual thing where they'd ask him, interested in coming back. And when he heard about Hibbett, who'd never asked him, then he just said, whatever, I'll turn up for that.
Yeah.
And there's a wee bit there in the briefly section that says, did you know Ray Clements once played left back for Skegness Reserves in the Lincolnshire leagues? And it looked it up a wee bit, and Ray Clements started out as a centre forward but then was a defender in his early teens before one day Lumley Secondary Modern School team found themselves short of a keeper. As a kid at Skegness Town at the time when George Rayner was the manager, he'd played at left back, and Clements was quoted as saying, "Had I stayed there, I would never have progressed beyond non-league football."
Oh, on such things that does life turn. And again, reading through this, the sad thing is when the names pop up, like, Ray Clements, the first name in this edition, and you're like, his death recently was, or a few months back, was kind of one of those deaths there. Like, he was synonymous with the football you watched in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
He was synonymous with Shoot magazine. He was a columnist with Shoot. So when he died, even though I wasn't a Liverpool fan or a Spurs fan, I was like, oh, there's something really sad about that. Like, for me, Clements is always this guy. I mean, obviously he won a lot with Liverpool, but I just always picture him on the other end of that Justin Fashanu goal, the Norwich, Justin Fashanu's goal for Norwich. Clements is always stretching in vain to kind of claw that one back, I have that very vivid memory of seeing him on Match of the Day, seeing that goal and him on the other end of it on Match of the Day.
So anything else on these pages, Dave?
Yeah, there was one other guy who, again, like Kenny Hibbett. If somebody said to me Kenny Hibbett, I'd say Wolves. Like there was so many players then who were synonymous with their clubs. They were like part of the fabric of their clubs. And if you go back to the other page, Steve Foster with the headband and Brighton, Steve Foster was Brighton to me, that he was synonymous with that. And he, I know he was there for a long time because I grew up with a guy called Paul, playing against a kid called Paul McCarthy, who then in 87, 88 went to Brighton, and he was a centre half, and he was basically like Steve Foster. He was a clone of Steve Foster. He went from Cork. He played on the same team as Roy Keane, actually. He was Roy Keane's teammate growing up, and Paul McCarthy went to Brighton where Steve Foster took him under his wing, and he was, supposed to succeed Steve Foster. And he played quite a bit for Brighton. He ended up playing for Wickham, and he had a very good career in the lower leagues, Paul McCarthy. But, the fact that he was playing with Steve Foster within a couple of years of playing against the likes of me was fantastic. That was, and unfortunately, Paul McCarthy died. He died very young, a couple of years back in his mid-40s. But he was a sensational player, and he would have scouts would have picked him to go to England when they would still be ignoring Roy Keane. He would have went to England at 15 or 16, and Roy Keane would have stayed, would not yet have got any offers to go on trial in England.
What was Roy Keane like at that age? Could you see something in him, or?
Well, the problem that Roy Keane faced was maybe it wasn't a problem. He played on this incredible team, kind of a team of all the talents, as we used to call it, and they had their best player was this, classic old-fashioned winger called Alan O'Sullivan, who went to Luton Town in 87, maybe 86, 87. Alan O'Sullivan was the greatest, teenage player I ever saw in my life. Like literally the kind of winger who would just kind of go past 4 or 5 players routinely. Just an incredible talent. And he went to England first. He was the first one of that team to go over, and he was with Luton. He was playing for the Irish youth team, etc. And then he got injured. Classic kind of sad tale. He got injured playing for the Irish youth team in an international, and his career never recovered. And Keane was their kind of midfield dynamo, this narky kind of force of nature in midfield. They were actually a year younger than me, but they used to play a year up. They'd win everything in their own age group, and then they would basically play a year up and almost win everything there as well. But they just had an incredible team. Like the Cork team, which was the select team of the best players in the city, like 6 of that team would have been from their team. So Keane wasn't the best player originally on that team, but he grew into the rope. He was very small as well, kind of a small mulleted kind of midfield dynamo. But he then, as time went on, you could see him just getting, growing more and more into himself. And then by the time he was 17 or 18, it was a question of why he was not in England. And in fact, there's a great story that, Brighton, somebody told Brighton, look, you took Paul McCarthy from this team, you should come back for this guy, Roy Keane. And their Irish scout kind of poo-pooed the idea and said, no, we're not taking him. On such things. But yeah, Steve Foster reminds me so much of that whole, of that, because when Paul McCarthy was playing alongside him for Brighton, we couldn't, that was incredible to achieve that, to get that far and, from leaving Cork just a couple of years earlier.
So, Andy, hand over to you.
Yep, okay. So you're more than aware of the Focus On features in the magazine. So it's just a set of standard questions. So, full name?
Full name, David Hannigan.
What's your birthplace?
Cork City.
What was your first car?
Mazda 121.
Who's your favourite player of all time?
Messi.
Okay. Who's your favourite team?
Cork City, my hometown team, and then Aston Villa would be my quote unquote English team.
Okay. What's the most memorable match that you've witnessed?
In 1998, I was at Holland and Argentina in the the World Cup quarterfinal. I think it was in Marseille, and I was working as a sports writer, and I was doing a live report, and it was the Bergkamp goal. The Bergkamp goal where the ball goes over the top, and he pulls it down and then slots it home, and obviously I had to rewrite the match report. But it was one of those moments of just like because the press box at a World Cup is so big that I wasn't on the halfway line. I was actually far more closer to where he was, or far closer, in line where Bergkamp was shooting from, or where he took the ball down. And it was just one of those moments like where you're going, this is incredible. I'm here, I'm being paid to be here and to see this, it was just a great, great moment just to witness that.
Okay, what's been your biggest thrill in your life?
Birth of my kids.
Okay. What's been your biggest disappointment?
Birth of my kids. Sorry. I think my biggest disappointment is how this country that I've chosen to live in has gone completely nuts in the last 10 years, and really, really dissolved. America is a very different country even from the one I entered 21 years ago. That's my biggest disappointment. I mean, if I give you a sports disappointment, I would like to give maybe that the Football Association of Ireland was run into the ground over the last 15 years, and the Irish national team is now suffering as a result of I won't name names, but people running that association in a way that was not kosher. And that saddens me, because I think Irish football will be decades recovering from that.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry, those are two very different answers.
No, I'm fine, absolutely fine with both of them, and I feel you with the first one as well. I think we're getting a bit of that over here as well. So, fingers crossed. What's the best country that you visited?
France.
What's your favourite food?
Hurley's sausages from Cork City.
Okay. Miscellaneous likes. So give me two things that you like doing.
I like kicking a ball with my kids, and I like reading.
Okay.
Reading books.
Okay. On the flip side, miscellaneous dislikes. So a couple of things that drive you up the wall.
Oh, that's a tough one. The abuse of organized religion. The abuse of organized religion in the pursuit of political goals is number one. And the constant promotion of betting around sport. The constant promotion of betting around sport. I see it in football in Britain, and I see it in every sport here. And it's disgusting, and it's doing incredible damage to people and families in society.
Yep, yeah. Favourite TV show of all time?
Deadwood.
Deadwood, nice one. Favourite singers or band?
Favorite band? Favorite, the Waterboys, who I think are Scottish/Irish, right? A little bit Irish, mostly Scottish. They'll be my favorite band, and my favorite singer would be John Prine.
Okay. Favourite actors? I'll let you have two.
What's his name? Lovejoy, the guy from Deadwood,
Ian
who's in
McShane.
Lovejoy. Ian McShane, right? Whose father was a winger with Man United, right?
Right.
Ian McShane and Jennifer Lawrence.
Okay. Who's your best friend?
My best friend. My best friend is my friend Mark. He's a school teacher in England.
Right.
He's a school teacher in England. He's my best mate.
Okay. Who's been the biggest influence on you?
My father, he was not an educated man. He left school when he was 12, but he put books in my hand and he put magazines in my hand. And actually, he was a big man for going to the secondhand bookshop in my hometown, and I would accompany with him there. And the woman who ran it would bring me in behind the counter, and she had a Super Sir heater, and she would sit me down next to her as my dad would be browsing for thrillers and crime novels and stuff. And she would basically let me look through all the magazines. Now, I would have all the shoots, but there was a magazine at that time too called Scoop.
Yep.
If you remember that, Scoop magazine, and then she'd have old Roy the Rovers and old Tigers and Hotspur and all those, Warlord, all the other kind of comics. And I would sit with her flicking through those and talking to her while my dad would get books. And that was one of my favorite things. I was on a Tuesday night, he used to do that after work. So he put books in my hand and encouraged me to read. And that was, that's kind of been my life ever since, I suppose.
Yep, great one. Next one. Last question. Which person in the world would you most like to meet?
That's a tough one. I would say Messi. I would like to meet Messi, because you don't see him talking that often. I'm not sure he's the most interesting guy in the world, but he's the one guy who has, I get into fights with friends of mine who are like, Maradona, it's Maradona, it's Maradona. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, we love Maradona. Maradona was special, obviously, but we never saw Maradona play that much. Like, I have seen just about every game Messi has ever played. We have a highlight reel that's much more comprehensive. And he's just, obviously he's not as interesting as Maradona. He's not as sexy as Maradona in terms of the madness and the personality. But he is just a very, very interesting. It's interesting to me that this small guy has kind of held us all in his thrall for so long.
Yeah, I think personally I flip between the two of them intermittently. But I just think Messi's done it so consistently, and also against world class. What I love about Messi is he makes world class players look very ordinary, as if they've just learned to play the game, and it's just amazing to see.
It is, and like the Maradona thing, men of a certain age when Maradona died, like that was just, that was just a moment in your life now that you remember that, and that kind of made you all kind of feel older or whatever. But we didn't see that much of Maradona, we didn't. Like, I remember reading about Maradona in shoots, world football pages, but you wouldn't see that much of him. Whereas Messi, you've seen everything since he's 16. Every game's been, and like you said, he's played against generations now of a couple of generations of the world's best players and done it against all of them. And it really, and I think when people look back at the last 3 or 4 years of his career, they're just going to say it is a miracle that he dragged that Barcelona squad, the current Barcelona squad, to anything, because of some, the aging nature of the squad, the really terrible, mediocre players that they have around him at certain times. You know, that I think his achievements, you know, whatever, all these La Liga titles, you know, it really is just incredible.
Okay, that's the questions. Back over to you, Tom.
Before we dip back into the magazine, Dave, I was just going to ask a wee bit. You said at the beginning, a couple of your books are on Muhammad Ali. So I was going to ask if you had a sort of lifelong fascination with Ali.
I did, yeah. I mean, I had an uncle who was a big boxing fan, my dad's brother, and he'd have the Ring magazine up in his house. Now, to borrow one of his magazines to go back to being a collector, you'd nearly have to like give him your left kidney, you know, to get one out of his house. But I would read them when we go to visit his house, and I was always interested in Ali, and yeah, you know, like everybody. But the thing for me was, I suppose, when I became a sports writer, you discover that so much of the great sports writing is about Muhammad Ali. You know, I mean, I had that childhood, like McIlvenney, you know, to quote a great Scotsman, like Hugh McIlvenney's work on Ali is just incredible. Like, I remember being given that by a sports editor of mine called Ger Siggins. I'm being told to read McIlvenney on boxing and McIlvenney on Ali in particular. And you really then, you know, realize how much, and then you discover the Americans who wrote about him, like Mark Cram and even Mailer and people like that. But McIlvenney in particular, just incredible stuff. And I guess that's what kind of prompted that fascination. And I'm working on an Ali book right now. The first book was about Ali in Dublin in 1972, which was incredible moment of this, you know, black athlete arriving into the whitest country in the world and holding it captive for a week. Like, the people were fascinated. And then I wrote this very depressing book about his last fight, the drama in the Bahamas, which was inspired by McIlvenney's report for The Observer on that fight. And then my current book is about Ali in the 80s and 90s, when he's in the wilderness, when he's actually kind of a sad character and he's kind of off Broadway and just kind of his health is deteriorating and he's involved in all these dodgy business ventures, selling cookies and you know, selling powdered milk to Sudan, and just really is not you know, is not really doing well. And so that's kind of, yeah, he's my life's work, I guess, at this point.
Just when you're talking about Hugh McIlvenney there, I know for myself, writing about Scottish football, it's always great when you get the chance to quote something from McIlvenney, because he always had a really terrific turn of phrase for things.
Oh, it just like, you know, as I say, you dip into some of his stuff, and it's at once it's incredibly educational and probably improving you as you're reading it, and then at the same time it's like, well, there's nothing more to write. Like, it's been written, you know. I mean, he was, you know, they use this phrase like a man of letters. Like, geez, he really was that, you know. I mean, he really was a man of letters in terms of, you know, this stuff. And it's not just, you know, it's not just the you know, the stuff that he'd write about Ali. Like a simple thing, like I remember him writing a piece about Liam Brady when Brady was in Italy. And just, you know, obviously Brady was Irish, so we're interested in him, and he had this incredible career in Italy that really gets underplayed, I think. But McIlvenney went there to meet him, and it was just so brilliantly written, like, and just such a great portrait of this player rendered by this wordsmith, to use that terrible phrase, but actually it applies here. Like, he really was doing something with words that the rest of us can't do, really.
All right, so we jump back to the magazine then, Andy. So page 10, we'll go to here. Page 10 is soccer souvenirs, and there's bedspreads there. Was this kind of thing either you had, Dave, or you sort of coveted?
Oh, this was the great aspiration for me that I could never get. I would bother my mother and bother my father. The ads in this magazine, like, were just killers, you know. There was so much stuff in there that you wanted, and you know, like, even when I'm looking at it now, going, I can buy that now. Like, I couldn't have the money to buy that. Like, I just didn't have $16.99 at that time, you know. And it just is incredible. The ads, I could look through the ads in old shoots for years, because it brings back so much memories of stuff you wanted and you couldn't get. You know, you coveted this stuff, but you couldn't afford it, or we certainly couldn't afford it. And my mother would just fob me off, and then my dad would kind of fob me off in a nicer way. It was, kind of half encouraging me. But yeah, the whole bedroom set, the rugs, the duvet covers, geez, everything here is stuff that we wanted. And we could never, that we could never afford, or my mother would tell me we couldn't afford it, and I believe her. We had 4 kids. My dad was a doorman in the bank, so she wasn't lying. She was doing her best with what she could. But yeah, I wanted all of this. I mean, everything, all of the small ads in here are stuff that I want.
I think you can back that up, Tom, can't you, with your new purchase that you were telling me about from this very magazine?
Oh, what was it? Oh, yeah. As I was looking through this yesterday, I saw that Guinness Facts and Feats book for 1982, and I went, I wonder if I can find that something. I bought it second hand.
You're a grown up now. You're actually in charge of the money. Like, you're in charge of the money. You can do whatever you want with it. You worked for it. It's fantastic. Do you ever see that site, classicfootballshirts.co.uk? It's like porn for middle-aged men. You just go on there. You just go on there looking at all shirts and going, "Oh man, I want all of this, and I want it now."
I think you do a bit of that though, don't you? Buying classic shirts.
Who, me?
Aye.
Well, my moment wasn't a shirt. It wasn't even a magazine. It was Radio Rentals 1982 World Cup wall chart, and I had one. And 1982 World Cup was my favourite, and I had a wall chart then as well. And a few years back, I saw one on eBay, and I just had to buy it. And I've now got it framed and in my hallway. And it's like, there's no way anyone who came up with the idea of that wall chart in 1982 could have thought that somebody, 40 years later, would have it framed and on their wall. Incredible.
But I think this is we're a kind of a weird kind of generation in terms of this stuff, right? And if you go forward there to page 12, the pictures of the Scottish team, right? It's pictures of Scotland versus Sweden. There, you see those. Asa Hartford wearing that beautiful Scottish shirt, right?
Yep.
See it with the Umbro diamonds down the sleeve, right? So a couple of years ago, Umbro, which is kind of rebranded now a little bit as a kind of a streetwear brand. Certainly in America, it's kind of a stylish streetwear brand. I came across an Umbro tracksuit top in Target, which is like a big popular store here, and they had Umbro section, but they had basically a tracksuit that was that Scottish shirt in the tracksuit form without the Scottish emblem, right? Without the Scottish emblem. So I bought it for my son, and anyway, I bought it because I just thought it reminded me so much of that Scotland kit. Anyway, I go to Ireland a few months later, and as it happens, a friend of mine's mom has just died, and I happen to be in Ireland, so I'll go to the funeral. So my son comes with me, and he's wearing the tracksuit top, the Umbro diamonds down the side, and we get to the church, and another old friend of mine, I spot him sitting in the pews, so I go in, I sidle up next to him. And, he knows my son and whatever. And next thing he leans over and he goes, "Love the Scottish 82 tracksuit." Like he hadn't seen me in a couple of years, but it was like, "Love the Scottish 82 tracksuit." Because that all, people of our generation would look at that and immediately associate it with that,
So I was going to read page 12 there. We've got the worldwide column with Chris Davis. One wee thing I wanted to pick out was down at the bottom where it says Pele is still much sought after. He was recently a judge for the Miss Universe beauty competition taken by Miss Venezuela.
The great sadness of growing up, I think, is discovering what a shill Pele was. I mean, you grow up watching Giants of Brazil, the great video of the glory years of Brazil and Pele and whatever. And, he obviously was before my time, but I just associate him now with Viagra, with Sprite, with every, he was very involved. And do you remember Freddie Adu, the teenage wonder kid? It was a very sad story, made his debut at 14 for for DC United in Major League Soccer, and Pele and himself had an ad running. The kid was making his debut at 14, and Pele and himself did an ad for Sprite, because Pele obviously still is very big in America, and I just thought, you know, Pele, there's nothing Pele won't do for money, you know, which is obviously, judging the Miss Universe probably wasn't his most onerous thing he ever had to do for money, but there you go.
There was actually, in a magazine that we looked at recently with Craig Brown, we never talked about it, I don't think, but there was an article worldwide about Pele, and it said that he scored in a exhibition match, he'd scored his 1,264th goal of his career. And so I obviously thought, let's do the maths in this, because this. So if he made his debut at 15, let's say he's played for 25 years solid, that means he had to score 50 goals every single season for 25 years. Now, he did score 643 league games and 656 for Santos, and 92 for Brazil, and 64 for Cosmos. So let's say around 830 goals. So that means he scored 434 goals in other competitions. By that, we probably mean warm-ups and five-a-sides and things like that. I take him with a large pinch of salt.
Hang on. Is that counting the overhead kick in Escape to Victory?
Someone did say that to me. That
probably counts as double. Like that, well, they put in a couple of versions of the goal in the finished cut of the movie, so maybe he's counting it more than once.
I think he maybe gets likes of every time it's shown, he gets another goal for it. Maybe that's what's happened.
That's it, absolutely.
All right, so we've got a limited time now. I think we've only got about 10 minutes or so with you, Dave. So if we jump to the Wolves team group, then in the middle, and then we'll go to the letters page. So Wolves team group here in that classic old gold kit with the Umbro diamonds free flowing down the side. So interesting. Some names like what we're saying there that you just associate with Wolves. A couple of wee things I wanted to point out from there. It seems Andy Gray and Kenny Hibbett are wearing matching necklaces.
Yep.
There you go.
And if you look at, there's about 5 of the players in this team group who are actually looking at this camera, and the rest of them seem to be looking at another photographer.
Well, there's a couple of things too. First of all, I think the shirt is beautiful. Like, I just think every shirt that I see in this magazine from 1981, I think is better than the shirt that the club is wearing or using today, right? Yeah. It's a tale of 2 haircuts. Andy Gray's haircut, which is unbelievably, incredibly naff. And then, of course, George Berry's afro, which, again, you know, George Berry's afro, I associate that with Wolves. You know, I thought he was a great centre half, and the hair. You know, you remember him because of the incredible haircut. Now, Andy Gray was a shoot columnist.
Yeah.
I think it was it before this or after this that he was with Shoot, that he had a column? Because that brings back my childhood, a traumatic childhood memory of Andy Gray coming back from the summer. Remember, like, when players used to have, you know, they would disappear for a couple of months and stuff in the summer. And Andy came back and he wrote a column about visiting one of the members of Black Sabbath in LA, right? I think it was Black Sabbath. Yeah, Black Sabbath are from Birmingham, right? And he was friendly with a couple of the lads from Black Sabbath. And Andy had this beautiful picture of himself wearing an incredibly skimpy pair of Speedos, poolside in Los Angeles, you know, in the LA mansion of Tony Iommi or whichever member of, I don't think it was Ozzy Osbourne. I know it wasn't Ozzy Osbourne, but I think it might have been Tony Iommi. And I just remember, I have that vivid memory of that.
Are you looking for it right now, Andy?
Yeah, I've got it here.
You stick that on Twitter later on then?
That one there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I wasn't. I'm glad I wasn't making that up. Jesus. Yeah. But you know, the other thing that strikes me of this as well is, like, and I know anybody who's on Twitter loves that. You know, old footballers. Well, aging footballers, or I forget the person I follow, you know, who puts up pictures of the footballers from the 70s and 80s.
80s footballers aging badly.
Yeah, and you're like, even in this one, like, they all, to me, look like middle-aged men.
Yeah.
as a middle-aged man today, like they look like middle-aged men, and you're like, I'm sure they weren't. Like I'm sure, they were all. A lot of them were in their 20s and stuff like that. And the other name, of course, is Mickey Kearns, the goalkeeper, or one of the goalkeepers there. Paul Bradshaw was the other one. Mickey Kearns was another Irish international. He was actually usually the sub goalie for Ireland, but he would have been involved in Irish squads around that time as well.
Other wee thing I noticed is right at the bottom left there, or the bottom right, is we look Wayne Clark. He's got his socks almost up over his knee, which I think is a kind of modern invention, but he's almost got his socks over his knees.
Yeah, and the other thing, like again, which is real, we're old fogies complaining about the world today. Look at all those beautiful black boots. Look at our black boots with white stripes. Those were the days.
And also, with that, it's probably anybody had a pair of those sort of boots when you were wee. You would try and keep the dubbing or the polish on the black bits, but you know that the white bits would eventually become grey, and I can see that in a few of those there as well. So, it's not as if they get a brand new pair of boots to start every season, is it?
No, and the thing about, I thought about the daubing and the cleaning is like they were cleaned by 15-year-old boys. You know what I'm saying? Like those were I know that doesn't happen today, but like those were the times the apprentices would clean the boots, right? And all sorts of other ignominious tasks that they were given, which I think today would be classified as kind of sort of abusive, like cleaning the toilets and stuff like that. But that's when the apprentices genuinely were apprentices.
Yeah. I've just noticed, Tom, you talk about the strip that they have where they have the Wolves badge and the WW. But the WW is on the shorts, if you look at the coats there, or the physio.
Oh.
So
heads on the
yeah, because there is one where the WW's in the middle of the strip, isn't it?
Yeah. And the 3 Wolves, and then they've got the WW. That was a strip sort of before this one.
Yeah, there was the Wolves, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up for the last few minutes then, so if we can jump on to page 31 with the letters page and see if we can have a look at a couple of the letters here. So Stop the Hugging is a letter there, G.H. Hollyoak from Coylton. With the new season underway, we are all looking forward to plenty of goals, but one thing we could do without is the hugging and embracing that follows them. It is not only idiotic, but positively dangerous to engage in these antics, especially with players changing hands at £1 million plus. How, for instance, will an insurance company react to a claim for an injury to a star player inflicted by a euphoric teammate?
Well, they were right. Steve Morrow, it was a few years down the line, but was it Steve Morrow? Adams. Yeah, and Tony Adams. But it's, the funny thing, they were worried about the hug. Can you imagine if Mr. Hollyoak, and I presume it was a Mr. Hollyoak, was still around when they started doing those coordinated celebrations?
Yeah.
Robbie Keane was doing his pistols firing into the crowd, kind of, geez, the game is gone kind of territory there for that poor man, very, very different, a different world, it wasn't. I guess that was the start of that whole kind of, people actually celebrated things. Well, people celebrated when they score.
Yeah, I mean, it is when you look back in old games, how they just sort of, sometimes they don't, they'll just go up to a person and shake their hand and they'll all just start walking back and you think, where is the celebration? I'm fine with people celebrating. That scoring goals is what football is ultimately all about. And if you can't celebrate that, then
there's a problem here with baseball. There's a lot of problems with baseball actually, but there's a problem here where all the old white men who watch baseball, right? Because the sports demographic is largely middle-aged and older white males, and they have brilliant young players who are flamboyant and do things like flip the bat after they hit a home run, and they want it banned. They want it stopped. It's guys like showing any sort of emotion or flamboyance when they do something great. They're trying to crack down on that. There were calls, and that's in 2020, or 2021. They're cracking down on that stuff. They don't want that kind of coming into the game. You hit the home run, you jog around the bases. You don't flip the bat in celebration. It's unseemly in some way.
And the last wee thing to look at then is the letter headed Naughty Nobby. So this is a complaint about the cartoon Nobby, and it's a complaint that comes from Graham Kelly, Secretary of the Football League. And he says, I don't know which club Nobby is with, but none of our teams has to travel 300 miles to an away match on Boxing Day. Cartoon, August 29th. The computer is programmed to avoid excessive travelling to games over the holiday period. Also, computer is not spelt Computor. At least ours isn't. And Shoot have replied, we ought to show Nobby a red card, but we can't even do that now. I assume this was the period where they kind of stopped doing the yellow and red cards for a while in the English Football League.
I love that the Secretary of the Football League, with 92 clubs to look after, right? And all the attendant problems facing the game, this was the era of hooliganism, etc., everything going on, and Graham Kelly sat down and wrote or dictated a letter to Shoot, complaining about a cartoon. It's fantastic, when you think about it. It also shows you how important Shoot was, Shoot was a big part of the culture of the game, like in a way that, with the best will in the world, 442 or any of these magazines today are not. I mean, they're peripheral publications these days, but this was central because I'm sure Graham Kelly saw that this was every young boy and maybe a lot of girls in England at the time, in Scotland and Wales and Ireland, were looking at this magazine and this was their gospel kind of thing.
I'm wondering why he thought to take them to task about it. I mean, it sort of suggests that he was getting a bit of pressure or people complaining about it, which just seems really strange thing to happen. But
absolutely.
But again, just back to what you said earlier on about how players were talking about fellow players without any sort of filter on them. And in the articles as well, so the likes of the Tartan Talks and the Ray Clements ones, I always thought that they were quite honest and open in those as well. And here we have somebody from the FA, the Football League, writing in, and it's just like, it's changed so much now. People have to be careful what they say, they have to do it through the right channels, and there's a lot to be said about this, actually being honest, open, and reaching the people.
And the other thing is like that it showed you that they read Shoot.
Yeah.
That in the Football League offices, they were reading Shoot. Like, that to me is incredible. Like that the same thing that you at 9 and 10, 11 were reading this religiously, they were perusing it maybe to see like what Gordon McQueen said or what, what Ray Clements said. Did anybody say anything? Brian Robson, who features in this one, anybody else say something that was not, not appropriate or over the line in some way.
All right, so before we let you go then, if you can just tell us where people can find you, where people can read your work and what you're up to.
Well, I write a weekly column in the Irish Times called America at Large, which is on the website, which is basically a look at a sports story from America in a given week. It can be about anything. It can be about the NBA. It can be, last week's was about the only Catholic priest to play in a Major League Baseball game. It can be an arcane story from, there's actually an interesting story up there about when Eintracht Frankfurt scored or toured America and played a very famous game against Celtic, an infamous game against Celtic, kind of a bloodbath in New York, where Celtic fought Eintracht Frankfurt. So it can be anything to do with American sport. A lot of American sports history intersecting with Ireland and England, or I'm sorry, Britain to an extent as well. So that's it. I'm on Twitter, and my books are available on Amazon and stuff like that. Places like that.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Dave. It's been too short. We need to get you on again if.
Absolutely, guys. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate this trip down memory lane. Who doesn't like to talk about when they were 10 and the world seems so full of possibilities.
Exactly. No, listen, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure having you on. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks a million, guys. Have a good one.
Cheers. Right, cheers, Dave. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Our charity partner this season is the West Dunbartonshire Community Food Share. This is a charitable organisation that provides various services and support to the local community, including the following: a school uniform bank, school holiday brunch bags, food provisions, Christmas toy bank, cooking and growing lessons and a baby bank. They provide essential support to the local community in supporting individuals and families, and we will be looking to support them in any way we can through the podcast. This will include drives for donations of food, money and support in the form of volunteers. We will also be raising awareness of the group to highlight the work that they do, but also to ensure that families and individuals who can benefit from the group are aware of these vital services. You can follow them on the West Dunbartonshire Community Food Share group on Facebook or West Dunbartonshire Community Food Share.co.uk for the website, and that's West Dunbartonshire with an N. You can also donate through our Just Giving page for the charity at justgiving.com/fundraising/shoot the breeze, one word. Also keep an eye on our Twitter accounts at shoottb_podcast and at Scott's Footy Cards for updates and news on our charity partner. We'd like to say a special thank you to Pete Wiley of the Mighty Wah for the use of the Story of the Blues in the music for our show. You can catch up with Pete on petewiley.co.uk, where you can check out the details of upcoming gigs and new music. We'd also like to thank our producer Diane Jardin for her great work and support on the podcast. Please check out transmissionroom.co.uk, where you can book music recording and rehearsal facilities in Clydebank.